Hi, everyone. Welcome to Infrastructure as Code, building Azure applications with ARM templates. My name is Alex Frankel. I'm a program manager on the Azure deployments team, and I have with me my manager, Satya Vel, also a PM on the deployments team. But we only have 20 some odd minutes, so let's jump right into it. If you're brand new and you don't know what ARM templates are the native infrastructure as code solution for managing your Azure resources declaratively. Essentially, you describe in a JSON document exactly the resources and the properties of those resources that you want to exist, and then we take care of the how. So we do things like retry logic, and we take your whole template and we validate as much as we possibly to ensure that not just one resource will create successfully, but the entirety of your resources will work together successfully, and try to validate as much as we can up front. So they are the best way to deploy your resources declaratively. And if you are new, we have totally revamped our beginners tutorial. So I highly encourage you to check it out. We'll have all the links in our Q&A slide at the end. Basically, we go through in very fine-grained detail each section of the ARM template and how it works, and build one concept at a time and make sure we go through it really slowly and methodically so you can pick up everything really clearly. If you haven't been paying attention to ARM templates for a while, in the last 6 months, we've announced a lot of new features in private or public preview. We go into a lot of depth in our Ignite session from this past November, where we actually announced and introduced a lot of the features that we're going to be giving you updates on today. So we also have the link for that full Ignite session, and you can check that out after this session. But we're going to start by giving you some product updates on things like deployment scripts and the TTK, What If, and the VS Code ARM extension. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about some new features as well as some roadmap for the future. So to start off, we'll talk about deployment scripts. Deployment scripts are all about helping you complete the last mile of your ARM template deployments by running an arbitrary PowerShell or Bash script within your template. So if you have that one thing, maybe you need to call out to an external system, or you need to hit an API that's not part of ARM, you can do that now with deployment scripts. We've been in private preview for about 4 or 5 months now, but we are starting the public preview of deployment scripts today. So you can get started with that right now. We have introduced a bunch of new features since the private preview started. You can now run Bash and Azure CLI in addition to what we shipped in the private preview, which was PowerShell. And then you can also have more customization of the storage account and the ACI instance that we create under the covers to actually run the script. So if you have policies that set things like naming conventions, now you have sort of full control over how those resources get created, and you can make sure that you're complying with policy when you do that. We also have new portal, PowerShell, and CLI experiences for reading the output and the logs of the deployment script that you just ran. So you can really easily start debugging and find out exactly how the script ran. The next one is the ARM or the test toolkit. Essentially, this is static analysis or linting or testing of your ARM template code. When we originally started talking about this back at Ignite, it was part of the Quick Start repository. We've since moved it to its own repo under Azure/ARM TTK. So you can open issues or you could submit PRs. We now have unit testing for the TTK itself. So it's a lot easier for us to take your PRs and make sure that they're validating successfully and make the TTK better. We're also planning to publish this to PowerShell Gallery so that it's that much easier to consume in your pipelines or wherever else you want to run it. The next one that we'll be talking about is What If. What If is a really great feature for helping you preview what your ARM templates are going to do before they happen. So what a lot of people used to do in order to test their templates was actually just to deploy it. That was really the only effective way to find out if your ARM templates were doing what you would expect. But now you can use this what if tool to actually preview exactly what the ARM template is going to go do. And we don't need to keep track of any state file. We always operate on the latest state of Azure. So you just compare the template that you have and the current state in Azure. The public preview has been underway now for about 2 weeks. We have shipped the AZ CLI commands in addition to the PowerShell commands. We've also introduced a really nice kind of user experience improvement with this -confirm behavior. Basically, you do the same deployment command that you're used to today, and then you add -confirm at the end, which tells us to run what if before we do the deployment, and then we ask you if you want to actually proceed based on the results that you're seeing. When we shipped the private preview, we shipped with some known noise issues where what if thought some changes that were going to happen that weren't actually going to happen. We've been spending a lot of time since the private preview started on reducing that noise. So now for the top 10 resource types, we have great noise reduction and it's very, very accurate. We've also been, with your help, closing a lot of issues in our ARM template what if GitHub repo. So we've closed about 25 so far. We triage them every week. So I encourage you to open more issues and you'll get a response very quickly. And then the last update is on the VS Code extension. We'll be walking through this a little bit more in a quick demo. But the VS Code extension is bar none the best tooling that we have for authoring ARM templates. It's one of the favorite projects that I've been a part of here at Microsoft. It really helps you improve your day-to-day workflows in ARM. The team that manages this extension right now has been just shipping like crazy. They shipped an 0.10 release just this past week that really helps you tie together your parameters file with your ARM template and better IntelliSense, more schemas for all your resource types. So you might have noticed we tell you that an API version or a resource type is missing. You should be noticing that happening less and less often as we publish more and more schemas and backfill those schemas. The VS Code extension is now managed by our friend and colleague Neil Peterson, and you can reach him at Twitter or GitHub with those aliases. So let's demo what if and the VS Code improvements. So I have an ARM template here. It's pretty basic. It has a few different parameters here, one variable, and then it is setting up SQL Server and SQL database. You can see here, if you haven't seen the VS Code extension before, we do great syntax highlighting to make the document more scannable. We support comments natively, so a lot of improvements there. And what I can see here is I have some parameters. I have one default value for the location, but then the username and the password have no default values. I want my consumers of this ARM template to fill this out as part of deploying the template. I've already deployed this and I filled out the parameters on the command line, but now I want a parameters file so that I can keep this somewhere and check it into my source control. Previously, I would have to create the parameters file and basically do a copy-paste exercise to fill out the parameters. But now I can actually auto-generate a parameters file by just right-clicking in the document editor and selecting Select or Create Parameters File. I can say New, or I can browse for an existing one if I have it. So I'll say New, and then I can choose between only the required parameters or all parameters, which means even if it has a default value, it'll still create a parameter for that. I only want the required parameters, so I'm going to select Save here, and then it automatically wires the two together. So I have some comments here. I need to fill in these parameter values. So I'll say admin user, and then for the password, I'm going to actually store it as an object here for a second and show you what validation we do now when it's not the right value. Sometimes I need to reset this here. Here we go. So it's actually catching that these parameters don't match up. This is expected to be a secure string. but my parameters file is an object. And so it's able to flag that for me in advance, which is something that I may not have noticed until I actually deploy the template. So now I'll make this password 234. And to test what if, we're going to make a change to our ARM template so we can take a look at what that's going to look like. So we'll change the database from a basic to an S2. We'll save that, go to my terminal, and we're going to test out the AZCLI command. So we're going to do deployment group create. We're going to do -G for our resource group, -F for our template file, and then -P for the parameters file that we just created. And then now I'm going to add the -C flag, which stands for confirm with what if. And so we're going to see that start, and what's happening now is it's doing two things. One is it's taking this template and compiling it. So it's basically resolving all the parameters and variables and projecting out exactly what it's going to go do. At the same time, it's going to get the latest status of the Azure resources from Azure directly. So I don't need to have a state file or know where a state file is or make sure that the state file is accurate. It's always going to pull the latest response from Azure. And I can see here what it's telling me is that the database SKU is going to change as expected. So I can see that change transition from basic to S2. There's a ton of other resources in this resource group, but what if understands that it's not going to make any changes to that, and it's not going to make any changes to the SQL server that's in this template. It's going to say it's no change, and I can proceed with that. And now I'm asked if I want to execute the deployment. At this point, I can just say yes, and it's going to kick it off. But I'm going to leave this as is for now. So that is what if and VS Code improvements, which you should definitely go check out. And now we're going to talk about something new, template specs. So template specs are all about taking the ARM templates that you already have and making them available within Azure so that you can share it throughout an organization. So we know sharing ARM templates is really important. You might have kind of canonical templates that you want other teams to consume, and template specs is the way that we're going to make that happen. So let's talk about how template specs are going to work. Basically, you take your ARM template and any supporting files. If you have link templates or other artifacts, they'll all get packaged into the template spec. I'll package it and send it to Azure, to ARM. And what that will do is create the template spec. At that point, I have an Azure resource that is my template spec, and I can deploy it wherever I need to deploy it. This is a net new resource type, so it's under the Microsoft.resources namespace. It's called template specs. Essentially, you can think of this as an ARM template private registry. It's deployable as a standalone ARM template, or I can deploy it as part of a larger, more complex deployment as a linked template, which I'll show you in a second. And these are versionable, so you can publish distinct versions and consume distinct versions as you would with like a NuGet package or an NPM package or anything like that. This is what it looks like to create a template spec. This is creating a template spec with an ARM template itself. So you can see the template spec is the parent resource, and then the version is the child resource, and that's where the actual template content is. So I can copy and paste the template right here, and then deploy the template, and I'll have a template spec. We're also going to have CLI and PowerShell command line tools. Basically, you just point the template spec command to the file that represents the main template or the parent template, and we'll use that to go and grab everything we need to package that link template or package that template spec. If you do have files like link templates that you are referencing, we will package those up as well. So if I have a file structure like this, this is the syntax that I'll use to give instructions to the CLI tools to actually go and grab the necessary file. So if you're used to link templates, you're used to a URI property here. This relative path property is going to be net new, and so you can use a relative path to reference your file, and then the command line tools know to look for that, grab the files, and push it all to Azure, all on your behalf. And then this is what it looks like to actually deploy a template spec in a few different contexts. So this is deploying it as a nested template. And again, I have the same Microsoft.resources/deployments resource. So if you're used to link templates, that's the same. But again, if you're used to the URI, now we're going to replace that with an ID. And that ID is going to point to the template spec that you actually want to create. So these are completely secured in Azure. If you read access to the template spec, then you'll be able to deploy it in a context like this. And then if you want to deploy the template spec as kind of your root template, you'll be able to do that as well. Here's an example of doing that with the CLI. Okay, and now we'll talk a little bit about roadmap, some of the bigger things that are further ahead for us that we're really excited about. The first one is around resource lifecycle management. Essentially, the idea here is that you can define a collection of resources that you want to manage as a single unit. Basically, they share the same lifecycle. And it doesn't matter if those resources are deployed in different resource groups or different subscriptions. This would define a logical unit that represents something that you want to manage together. And essentially, it's a foundation to improve some of the workflows that are challenging today around creating those resources and locking those resources and deleting those resources. Deleting a lot of resources spread out over many resource groups can be a big challenge today, and this is how we want to improve that. We are going to have a preview for this in the second half of this calendar year, so stay tuned for updates on that one. The next one is a language revision. We know that authoring ARM templates in JSON comes with its own set of challenges, and we do want to really improve the authoring experience by revising the language pretty significantly. Readability is the top priority. We know a lot of people are consuming these. Some people may have a programming language background, some may not. And so we want to make it really easy and approachable for all sorts of people that are going to be deploying infrastructure to Azure. You will no longer need to write JSON. It won't be JSON. It also won't be YAML. But that JSON ARM templates aren't going to go anywhere. So you'll still be able to author those JSON ARM templates. Those are going to continue to work. It will have first-class modularity and multi-file support. So breaking down your templates can be a challenge today. If you want to just separate out your code, you have to stage files, and that comes with its own set of challenges. So we really want modularity to be a key focus. Code reuse just gets more and more important. So we're going to build that in as a first-class citizen. It's going to be a transparent abstraction of Azure. And basically what that means is we want to abstract away as much as we can without abstracting the platform itself in any way. So if you need a specific property or a new API version, all of that day zero support that you've come to expect from ARM templates is going to continue to work in this new language. And lastly, it's going to be open source. So we are really looking forward to designing this with you. Basically, we want to get an 0.1 release out there as soon as we can, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 months, and then build it with you and learn how you're using it and how you want to use it to make sure that the final 1.0 product is exactly what you need it to be. We have been getting a bunch of questions from the first 2 sessions that we've done here, so I want to answer a few of them as well as I can before we jump to the Q&A. So one question we've been getting is, will I be able to convert my existing ARM JSON to the new language? And the answer is yes. So we do want to have a migration or a conversion, or sometimes called a decompilation tool, to take you from the ARM JSON to the new language. It may not be exactly the code that you would write in the new language, but it should be a great jumping off point to get you started. Will all ARM constructs and resource types still be supported? So there are things in ARM templates like copy loops and if conditions and all those sorts of details. Everything is going to continue to work. Basically, anything that you can do in an ARM template in the JSON, you'll be able to do in this new language. That's a critical bar that we need to meet. Yes. And then lastly, is this a new language, and why not use an existing one? The answer is it is a new language which compiles down to ARM JSON. So you'll have a higher level DSL or domain specific language that when you run it through the compiler will actually compile down to the ARM JSON that you're already using today. And what that does is it leaves the door open for other implementations and other high-level languages. So we do want to continue to kind of explore this space and explore other ways to make ARM authoring easier. And by treating the ARM JSON essentially as an intermediate language, it makes it possible to do all sorts of experimentation in the space. Lastly, we do want to direct you to our Yammer group for customers. It's the deployments Yammer group. You can follow this link to get an invite to that. We collect feedback and ask questions of you guys all the time on there. And it's actually just a great discussion group to ask questions and get answers really quickly. So do follow that link and join the Yammer group there. So at this point, we'll do Q&A for the remaining time. You have all these relevant links, and you'll have a copy of these slides, so you can take those links as well.
Alex, awesome job on the session. A lot of excitement on the chat on the work we're doing. The first question that
audio went out, so I can hear you now.
The first question that came through was, how should we think about integrating What If with Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions? How do we think about integrating into the CI/CD flow?
Great question. So you have a few options for integrating What If into your pipelines. The example I showed returned the text output of What If, and that's great, obviously, for humans to read. So what a lot of people are kind of experimenting with now is actually storing that text output with the expectation that a human is going to review that and then manually move it on to the next phase of the release. The other option that you have is to get the actual JSON response. So we have two versions of the commandlets to get either the text output or the structured data response. And then you can parse that with whatever tool you would like, and you'll know how many resources are going to be created. You'll know if any resources are going to be deleted, and you can look for specific property changes that you may or may not want to happen. So you do have the flexibility there to do that as you would like.
Excellent. Michael L. asked, is there a code name for the new language?
The code name is called Bicep, as in ARM Bicep. It's a joke that's so bad it's good. So that's the internal code name that I want us to keep using for as long as possible, but we'll see how long I can last with that.
I think marketing might have a say on that one. Another question that came in is, I think the question was around the lines of, have we thought about, why did we choose the DSL approach versus doing something more like supporting TypeScript or JavaScript as a language?
Yeah.
Or YAML.
I mean, YAML, to kind of get it out of the way, is really very similar to JSON in that the things that are hard with JSON, like looping and stuff like that, remains hard in YAML. It's not a significant enough change, we think. We did spend a lot of time testing a variety of options. We tested kind of a JavaScript approach. We tested a variety of approaches there, and ultimately we found that the DSL really strikes the best balance for the personas that we're targeting. But as I said earlier, we're going to compile this down to ARM JSON, and that leaves the door open for a JavaScript implementation, for a C# implementation potentially. So we're not closing the door on anything. We think that there may still be valid reasons to have like a JavaScript equivalent if you have programming experience that you leverage.
We had another question that came in. I maybe don't have the context, but the person asked, can a template spec reference another template spec?
Yes, it can. You can reference template specs all the way down until you hit some ARM template deployment limit that I'm sure we're trying to raise right now. But basically, any template, as long as you get the resource ID right and you have read access to the template spec that you're calling, you can just keep going.
Stanislav, one of our favorite customers, asked, is there any new ARM functions coming, maybe easier way to get key vault secrets? And maybe we can share a little bit about how the work we're trying to do with the key vault team.
We are working with the key vault team to raise some limits There's not any functions that I can think of that are on the immediate roadmap. I don't know if we already released this. I know we were working on a management group function, just like we have the resource group and subscription function. We have or will have a management group function, but we're always taking requests for new functions that we think that you guys think are important.
Another question was, I think people are very excited about the new ARM DSL language and want to know how they can either get involved, provide feedback, or even see a demo. I think the sneak peek got filled up in 5 minutes, and so they want to know how to get involved.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to be super open. We've already been arguably too open about the process. We will have that initial, very basic release on GitHub as soon as we can. So that won't be the full functionality, so that we can get it to you fast and get your feedback quickly. Maybe if we get enough requests, we can kind of do a repeat of the session that didn't get recorded, because I know we have heard a lot of people are trying to understand what that's going to look like.
A lot of people are voting up the name Bicep. I don't know if I'm going to trust this audience on the name.
I love it. I love it.
I think another question that came about was, are we going to, for all the quick starts that we have for the existing ARM templates, what happens to those, and are we going to have a quick start library for the new DSL templates, and some questions around that.
Yeah, and the goal here is to, when we really transition to the DSL, we want to transition in all aspects. So quick starts, we want to upgrade. Template export, that should export the new DSL code as well. So we do want to treat this as an all-encompassing thing. We don't want to just update the language and then not update the ecosystem there. We do also, we're going to have a module story there, so that we as Microsoft can potentially publish modules, and then you as the community can publish modules as well. Excellent.
I think some other questions around just template specs. What scope is a template spec stored at? Is it subscription, tenant scope, and how does it work from a permissions perspective?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say it's most similar, I found, to like the user assigned managed identity resource. So it's stored in the resource group. And then the permission that you need in order to deploy the template spec will be just read permission. So if you can read that template spec, you'll be allowed to deploy it. If you need access cross subscription or anything like that, as long as it's within the tenant, you'll be able to provide the right permission so that users can get having a dedicated resource group for all the template specs that you want to publish, and then you can just give access to the resource group if you want to do it that way. We are also, we want to make this potentially a cross-tenant resource as well, but we're a little early. We don't know the exact details of how that's going to work just yet.
Someone had asked around, some of the limits that we have in the platform, and can you talk a little bit about what work is going on to alleviate those limits?
Yes, we're working hard to lift as many limits as possible. I think yesterday, Satya, you had tweeted out that the limit for the number of resource groups that you can hit with linked templates in a single template deployment, it used to be 5, which a ton of you were hitting. It's now 800. I look forward to the day when someone complains that 800 is not enough. We're also planning to roll out a kind of auto cleanup feature for the amount of deployments in a resource group. So if you've hit 800 deployments in a resource group, we start failing the deployments and you have to clean those out yourself. We're going to start auto cleaning those out in probably 1 to 2 months, hopefully. You'll be able to opt out of it if you want, but by default, we're going to start deleting the oldest deployment as you get closer to that 800 deployment limit. So ideally, you should just never hit that limit again.
And I think we have maybe one final question around, automating subscription creation. Is there work in progress around that? Yeah,
so we do have a API right now for creating enterprise account-based subscriptions. The limit now, I think, if you the public limit now is 500, but that can be raised up to 2,000 if you're creating a lot of subscriptions. And then we are going to make subscription creation via put API, which means it's basically being treated as a kind of normal standard resource. And at that point, it's just going to be a lot easier to create subscriptions. You can create them within ARM templates now as well.
Awesome. Hey, we are out of time, but I think this was an awesome session. Thank you for taking the time to present, Alex.
You bet. Thanks for moderating. Thanks to the production team for making this happen. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join this session. We appreciate it.